Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 1641 deals with charter schools, basically. We have one thing that got dropped in there. It's not necessarily charter school related. First thing is it changes the charter school board. If you remember, we have a state charter school board that was actually created by the General Assembly, and we're strictly changing that from 7 members to 9. We're allowing the governor to increase his appointment to 4, not more than 2 of whom can be of the same political party. We also change how the decisions are made by that particular board. So majority of those present would be able to pass the approved schools, etc. We also have, which is unrelated to charter schools, but we dropped this in the bill, adds a representative from ARC of Indiana to the list of members who must be included in the State Advisory Council on the Education of Children with Disabilities. That was brought to me at a request of ARC of Indiana. And then we had another request from, thank you, from some of our organizers who have had charter schools and have had a pretty significant legacy and want to be able to have the opportunity for alumni or a sibling of an alumni have access to that school. So there may be a period of time in between the time that person graduates. They want to be able to have preference given to the alumni so that or sibling of the alumni so that they can have access to a charter school. It's kind of like you would tradition of going to some of our colleges or high schools where you just, it's kind of a legacy thing. They wanted to have flexibility. So that's included in this. And then the biggest component of the school, and probably the most of the bill, probably the most controversial, is trying to get our arms around unused buildings, or as public schools take and decide that they're no longer going to use a building. How are we going to deal with those unused buildings? I have had, the language in the bill does suggest we're trying to tighten the timeline. Current state law says that if a public school determines that they're no longer going to use that facility, that they have 2 years, it has to be on this list. I personally think that's too long, so we're shortening it to 90 days. We are trying to also, I've had discussions with IPS, and which is one of the reasons we will not be moving the bill, trying to figure out a way, because I think in many cases your bigger high schools, for instance, are just so big that it's almost impossible for anybody to come in. Broad Ripple will be the example of John Marshall, that were designed for 2,800 students. To think that a charter school can come in and take it over and utilize that effectively doesn't make sense. So want to work with IPS to see how we might have a statewide policy for buildings like high schools, that we could figure out how to utilize them more effectively and give the schools more flexibility as far as that's concerned. And then the last item in the bill, which actually may be the most controversial, is the fact that we're starting some discussion. Currently, the way charter schools are funded, they get state general fund dollars, and then if you're A, B, or C, you get access to the charter school grant fund for facilities. The reality is that's a state appropriation. Every traditional public school today, on average, basic number is receives about $3,000 on top of what the state appropriates for general fund expenses through debt service, capital projects, and transportation. What this language would do would provide that if you were a traditional public school and had charter schools within your boundaries, and you were going to go out and do a capital projects referendum, that you would include that charter school in the disbursement of those funds and the discussion of that. It's education for the whole community. It actually, long-term, could have a savings to the state because it would provide additional resources. There are several, IPS obviously is, I think, one of the, IPS and Gary have the highest concentrations of charters. IPS is actually looking at several unique models, or at least a unique model to maybe address this in a different way, but they won't have any recommendations, I believe, till midsummer. But I think as you look at education, I know IPS has been somewhat willing to embrace that charters and innovation network schools are part of the landscape, and how can we collaboratively work together. They also are in the process of trying to reduce their footprint by almost 8,000 seats because of declining enrollment, and trying to work through ways to make it more effective. So with that, I know that IPS is going to be here to testify, a number of people, but we will be holding this bill so that we will have an opportunity to have further dialogue on this as well.
Questions from the committee? Representative Smith.
Yes. Why are you increasing the membership on the charter school board? Why is it necessary to go from 7 to 9?
I think just to provide more diversity in terms of the members that are incorporated in the board, and providing more opportunity for dialogue.
In one of our committees that deals with deregulatory, they want to reduce government. They're reducing boards from 9 and 11 and 7 down to 5. And here we're increasing a board.
I think it's a function. It depends on the function of the board and how they function. I think it's just trying to improve the function of that board, make it a little bit more effective.
I want you said you wanted to hear from the public and get the input so that you can come up with an amendment. Let me just express my concerns about two aspects of this bill. And the first one deals with the buildings. I've seen school corporations who have closed a building, and then the next year they go back and open it up, that building, because they get an increase of students. If you shorten this time to 90 days, that means immediately access to that building, and there's no chance for that local community to make use of that building or come up with some plans for that building, for use of that building, which will be beneficial to the taxpayers who are paying for or have paid for that building.
If I could respond to that just a second, if you ask that question. Actually, this would give, and I think those like IPS who's done this would probably say that's an advantage, rather than they have to sit on that property for 2 years, provide for operational cost of operating an unused building. That would shorten it 90 days. What you're not saying, you're saying that the opportunity for a charter to claim that building has been reduced from 2 years to 90 days. That's what we're effectively
saying. So what you're saying, okay, thank you for the clarification. You're saying that they have to make a request for it. Now, do they acquire it at the 91st day?
They have to claim. I have to go look at the details. I don't remember for sure if they have to acquire it the 90th day, but they have to. Currently, under current state law, it's a 2-year window, so it goes on this list for 2 years. I think that's an awful long time.
Well, I thought the 2 years was to allow that school corporation to use it if they needed to use it.
No, the 2-year, once that school corporation has decided they're going to vacate that building, they have to wait 2 years before they can make decisions as to what they want to do with that building.
Okay, but what if they want to sell that building and
under current state law, they can't sell it until that 2-year opportunity for it to be on this list is out there. Now, frankly, there are some, as this law was passed back in 2011, 2012, the unused building. And so if you look at the code, what ended up happening is, yes, there is a code site that will say that charter schools have access to property for up to 2 years. There's also a section of administrative code that says that did not get changed, which has caused a conflict in the Indiana Code in terms of what they could do, because the administrative code would allow them to lease, sell, or whatever. So if you go across the state, there are patchworks of places where a school may have decided to do something else and never put it on the unused building list that the state law requires. So if somebody challenged it, I'm sure it can be litigated at that point in time, and they'd have to decide.
So if a school corporation was closing the building and had plans to use it some other ways, then they would not be eligible for a charter school to acquire.
In
I
this,
mean, suppose we're closing the school, but we're going to make it the service center.
well, then they're technically they're continuing. If they're going to change the purpose, there is some flexibility in terms of what they're. I'll give you an example. IPS, I think, repurposed Northwest, was it? And well, actually, they changed it to a middle school, but it's also a transportation facility for them. There has been talk by IPS, for instance, to move their admin offices from the Walnut Street location to Broad Ripple. We're trying to provide a lot more clarity in terms of what you can do with that building, when that building would end up appearing on this list, so that it provides clarity for all school districts and would have the opportunity for them to make decisions instead of having a 2-year window where they have to hold out there, kind of taper that down to 90 days and give them the flexibility to have better.
So is that just notification in that 90 days, or they have to do something?
They have to. A
because
charter school has to lay claim to it within the 90 days.
Okay, and then they can hold it for what, forever?
You mean the charter school?
Yeah,
If the charter school
before they actually
decides
do
if
something with it.
the
For
charter
example, with some of the housing programs, if you bid for HUD or some of the city programs in Gary, if you acquire a house, you have to do something with that house within 90 days or something. You can't just sit on it. So, what if a charter school says, "Okay, I want this building, and we got 10 of them in Gary, too many for our population," and they say, "Okay," and one of them are, a couple of them are in very undesirable locations. So they say, "Okay, we want this building, but we don't have money to make the improvements. We're not going to do anything immediately. We just letting you know in 90 days that we want it. We claim it as ours, turn it over to us, and we sit on it."
Well, I would agree with you that one of the problems in the current law is, and this is something I had a discussion with IPS about yesterday, is that you could claim a charter school that has not even been approved could technically, but an organizer is in front of an authorizer, could actually claim to the building and tie it up for several years. They may not have the financial ability either to be able to. I mean, like I said, you look to a facility like Broad Ripple, which was designed for 2,800 students, and your projected enrollment is maybe 500. There's no way that it makes logistical sense. So we're trying to fix this problem. Is what we're trying to do in this bill.
Okay, so
Representative Banning, there are on page 19
I was just getting ready to.
C. Yes, it does talk about the time that a
It says
charter
that
school
charter
has
school
to
must
do
begin
something.
to use the building. I just to turn this open for that purpose. For classroom instruction is not later than 2 years after acquiring the building under subsection 2 years after the school. So if you look at page
they can
19,
they can sit on it 2 years in the community and let it be eyesore.
technically, although the school district currently under current law has to leave it there 2 years before they can do anything with it.
I can't imagine myself also, if I may interject, that they would not enter into a lease agreement that bound that charter school to be doing something or paying penalties with that. As one who's leased properties before in a school setting,
What do you mean penalties?
my
What kind of
attorneys would be
penalties?
all over that, of binding him into some
What kind of penalties?
financial
would they pay?
penalties
I don't see any penalties
if they
in this
didn't
bill.
meet. There's not in that. I think
But
it would be the
lease
school
agreements
corporation
generally
would do
would
that.
have, lease agreements and that would have
Yeah,
something.
but it's not a lease anymore. They're
Well-
giving it to them for $1.
It depends
not a
on the.
lease.
It depends on the how they decide to move forward with it. It could be a lease as well, or it could be a purchase. It depends on how the school district decides.
The
to move forward.
language in law says that
If
it's
you
a,
read
it's a
page
lease.
19, the charter school, it talks about during the term of the lease. Read page 19, starting in section C. It talks about during the term of the lease of the charter school closes, cease the school building for classroom instruction. The school building shall be placed on the department's list. Section 4 of this chapter. So it could be a lease agreement. It doesn't say that it has to be a purchase.
But there's other language that says that they can acquire for
Well, there's
$1.
also a purchase option, correct?
I haven't seen the lease language.
It's on page 19, beginning at line 2. If you go down and read down through that, you'll see it. During the term of the lease under this section, on line 22, chapter charter school is responsible for the direct expenses related to school lease, including utility insurance maintenance. It's all on page 19 that kind of outlines all that.
Okay, it should be put on the department's list under what? On what department's list?
If they just, you're reading, if the term of the lease, the charter school closes or ceases using the school building for classroom instruction, the school building shall be placed on the department's, it gets placed on this list again. So if the charter school would leave and the building is still in the possession of the school district, it gets put back on that list, so another charter could lay claim to it if they so chose.
So you're still letting it sit out there for years.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to streamline it as much as I can,
but
trying to provide access to.
I'm proposing some gaps in it that needs legislative.
Well, I know that, like I said, I intend to work with IPS. I've actually asked them for some language. I know that their intent would be to streamline it, and my intent would be to make this public policy would be applicable for every school district in the state that would provide opportunities, especially when you're talking about buildings for secondary buildings. That I would, for instance, I would suggest that, like a Broad Ripple, they may decide to, and I would think that the body would not be opposed to allowing them, as long as they continue to use it for educational purposes in some way, to maybe sell the property to a developer. And in that MOU with the developer, a component of that property has to be an educational facility. It could be an IPS, it could be a charter, but on that footprint, there would be a facility that would provide educational instruction for students in that community, and it would have to be structured in such a way that it would be below market rate, so it wouldn't be like I'm building a new building, I'm going to have to pay premium price for it. I mean, I think there's ways that we can give our school districts flexibility, but at the same time meet the threshold of trying to provide access to our charter school community to these buildings that were paid for by the public. That's really the intent, is that why should the public have to pay twice for it?
Okay, may I respectfully suggest that you're talking about IPS, but Gary's inundated with charters as well. And since the state has taken over the Gary system and GT is there as their representative, that you talked with Dr. Pete, who is the emergency manager, because we are doing we're down to 12 schools out of 100, out of 40, and he plans to close some more. And I think it shouldn't be just designed for IPS.
It won't be. I actually have correspondence. The governor's office has DUAB. Courtney is the chair of DUAB, so I definitely have correspondence with the governor's office in regards to this as well.
Okay. And my second concerns deal with this referendum. Here's a school corporation that's in trouble. It's asking its taxpayers to give them additional dollars, and then they must share it with the charter schools. The charter schools are in competition. I remember when you first started pushing charters that you were talking about the competition is good. So I'm in competition with you, but I'm going to generate dollars, but I'm going to share them with you, but I'm in competition with you. That's almost like Target saying, okay, I'm going to generate so many dollars, I'm going to have a special sale liquidation, but yet and still, I'm going to have to share it with Walmart. That doesn't make any sense to me if you're in competition.
Well, but the only difference would be, in fairness, I wouldn't use Walmart and Target because, number one, they both have funding that's somewhat. We're asking our charters to compete, but it's like we're holding. They get $500 right now for charter school grants, so they get $500 less.
Are those charter schools who are getting grant monies and getting money from foundations and so forth? Are they going to share them with the community? Are they going to share them with the school corporation? No, they're not. So why should the school corporation share its profits, its monies, And another point that was made initially, one of the distinctions between the charter schools and the traditional public schools was the fact that they were not getting local tax dollars, property tax dollars. Now you're saying that they're going to get local property tax. That's a big change. That's a major change, and it has to be considered in it. I just don't think it's fair. And I look at a situation like Gary, Indiana. We turned down 2 referendums. The plan with DUAB and with Courtney and with MDTA is to float another request for referendum. And then they're going to say that we got to divide this among 10 other animals out there. You know, there's 10 of them. So instead of asking now for for 100 million or 5 million or 10 million, whatever you're asking for, I've got to ask 10 times that because I got to share it. That's stupid. That's ludicrous.
Representative Smith, I think you've stated your position. We have others that want to have an opportunity at the mic, and we've got 12 people that want to come up and address some of these same issues. Representative Lucas.
Thank you, Chairman Cook. Representative Boehning, do chartered schools currently have access to property tax dollars?
No.
About how much per student is that?
Statewide average for traditional public schools averages approximately $3,000, including debt service, capital projects, and transportation.
And that's $3,000 per student.
Correct.
Thank you.
Further questions from the committee?
In fairness, Representative Lucas, charter schools do have access, if they're A, B, or C charter schools, to a $500 grant from the state to offset part of that difference.
Representative Delaney, I believe you had a question.
I want to make sure the 2 important provisions in this bill. Let's go to the one that may be easier. The one dealing with allocation of proceeds from a property tax referendum.
You think that's easier?
Yeah. No, it's easier. I think it's easier. You have to get to the end of the bill to understand what's going to happen. But your suggestion would be that, for example, if IPS had a referendum here last fall, am I right that the proceeds of that successful referendum are going to go to the traditional public schools with buildings owned by either IPS or by the building corporation? Is that where that money's going from last fall?
Last fall, yes. If they were doing it under the provision of this bill, they would have to coordinate with charters, and distribution would go. So they would have to make the referendum adequate to meet the needs of both charters and traditional publics.
That's what I'm getting to. So to be very specific, in the case of Indianapolis Public Schools, if my math is right, almost exactly 1/4 of the referendum money would have had to go to non-public, in the sense of traditional public schools, but to charter schools. Is that right?
They are public schools, so I don't know what percentage.
Well, it's right here on the chart from the LSA that the head count is 25%.
Of IPS.
They said 25% levy would go to the charter schools. So the voters would have been asked then to not merely fund the schools owned by the district, but also to fund the schools that are actually owned by separate corporations. Is that right?
They'd be asked to fund public schools, whether they're charter or traditional publics, kind of agnostic, making sure that the public is funded at a fairly equal level.
But this would be the first time there'd be access to property tax.
That's correct.
For charter schools.
Correct.
In Gary, it would be 53%. Muncie, it'd be 18.5%. In my district, the other district that I have is Washington Township. They'd be about 6% of the money, if they had a referendum, would have to go to the charter schools. But there's a structural difference. For example, the charter schools, I think there's one in Washington Township, they really don't have any real connection with the township other than physical location. That is to say, they don't draw on a pool of students largely from that township. They don't have the right, for example, if I understand it, one of my townships does not allow transfer students. So in Pike Township, all the students are residents, essentially all are residents of Pike Township. So we'll have people that don't have any real connection in terms of their student body to a district getting property tax revenue from the residents of that district. And this is something you support.
I think we're trying to figure out ways to equitably fund charter schools. I thought was interesting the report from Credo and IUPUI recently released in terms of performance, looking at the Marist charter schools, comparing it to IPS. The data was fairly significant that students in those charter schools who were there from K through, I think, grade 5, significantly outperformed on trying to figure out ways to best meet the needs of students in the community.
Well, I'm trying to think this through. So if I'm about to form a charter school under this bill, I could do two things. I could be a non-existent charter school and apply for an empty school, for example, that Washington Township wanted to leave empty for whatever reason. I could put my name in.
And they currently can do that as
Right, but I have 2 years under this bill to actually start operating.
I think they currently as well do. So
Currently, there's a 2-year hold. We
well,
got different math here. I'd have 2 years. Let me finish my thought. So
okay.
I'm this new charter school. I see an empty building in some township. And by the way, let's get away from Washington Township. It's in Plainfield. For some reason, they're closing the school. Or Carmel now is closing the school. So I say, I want that school. I got 2 years to get started up in there. And then if the school district, the Carmel Clay District, has a referendum, I get a proportion of that referendum depending on my head count. It strikes me that this will draw people to move into districts that they don't currently exist in, based solely on the fact that there's an empty building. So we're going to capitalize, I mean that in the literal economic sense, we're going to capitalize this charter school that wants to move into Carmel, for example. We're going to either give them the building, or if they have the building, we're then going to give them a cut of the referendum. This is a dramatic change.
I give you it's a dramatic change. I would argue, though, Representative Delaney, that one reason Carmel doesn't have charters is probably has nothing to do with underutilized buildings. But
Dying to hear what the reason
I
is.
think a lot of it's probably performance, that a lot of parents feel like the Carmel Clay schools are meeting the needs of their students. I think you see, because of the frustration, and rightfully, whether it's right or wrong, but because the parents feel like they want options in urban settings. There's no question that kids of poverty are more difficult to educate. And so parents are looking for options. They have exercised that by their feet and decided to go to a charter, voucher, whatever. So
We could have a long discussion, but the reality is, of course, people have been moving to get to districts, and people have been going to private schools and religious schools and on. This is nothing new. If I'm subjected to a 3-minute rule, I will see. But I'm telling you that I think this applies across the state, not just to those districts that have heavy.
I would agree.
Yeah, I think that point's well taken. And I thank you for your testimony. We'll take one more question, and then we're going to move to the testimony.
Just real quick, thank you, Mr. I'm confused of all this opposition to charter. Are charter students forced to go to those schools?
No.
They go there by choice?
Parents choose to send their kids to those schools, yes.
Okay, are these parents different from other parents? Are they tax-paying parents?
Yes.
Okay, so tax-paying parents are exercising a choice in their child's taxpayer-funded education, but are disadvantaged by about $3,000 per student, but yet they still want to choose to send their kids to these schools, and that's a bad thing?
I think you're asking.
I'm curious. I'm just trying to wrap my head around parents exercising a choice in their child's education. Thank you for helping clarify that somewhat.
At this time, we'll begin the testimony with J.T. Koopman, followed by Mike Brown.
Chairman Cook, members of the committee, Dr. J.T. Koopman, Executive Director of the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents. I am rising in opposition to this bill. And there's a couple things that I'll lay out, at least in my mind, that are similar in thought to Representative Smith and Representative Delaney and some of their comments. As I see it, we're trying to find additional money to pay teachers, and then we have a bill that is going to further erode dollars that are going to public schools with the encouragement to expand charters in our state with this bill. I've always opposed the notion that school communities that have spent millions of taxpayer dollars on a school building are now required to sell it to a charter school for a dollar, and these are often run by out-of-state for-profit entities. This bill also changes timelines for vacancy and notice from 2 years to 90 days, which is a clear signal to these out-of-state for-profit entities to set up shop in Indiana and further erode the institution of public schools in our state. The requirement for public schools to make purchases is usually on an average of 3 appraisals, yet this bill calls for the sale of public property to charter schools for 50% of market value. That seems contrary to current law and a double standard. It should be the same for all entities, or at very least 100% of fair market value. Allowing charter schools to share in referendum revenue is another notion that has nothing to do with the board that approved it for their public school district and did no work in its passing. As a matter of fact, it could have a negative effect on public schools when you have public school proponents that realize their hard work siphoned dollars away from their public schools.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Questions? Representative Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Koopman, when you say it siphons money away from public schools, is that an implication that that money belongs to public schools?
Yes.
Okay, is it the role of Indiana to fund public schools or to educate children?
Both.
Okay, are you against parents having a choice in their child's education?
I
You
think,
personally, but your organization.
I
that you
believe that the original context of charter schools were to be incubators of innovation, with the idea that a charter school was free from some of the systems that were in place for public schools, and if they could come up with something that could be replicated, that was the idea behind a charter school, was to be incubators of innovation that then could be replicated in the public school. And now that we've expanded way beyond that original notion, I don't believe it's good for the public schools where 96% of our children attend.
Charters only get about, what, 2% of our education dollars?
I have no idea.
I think it's probably less than 2%. So, but you're that concerned over a group of people that are getting 2% when I believe public education's getting 97%?
I'm an absolute proponent for public schools, period.
Over parental choice?
Yes, because they do have a choice, and public schools should be their choice.
Do all public schools offer choice between public schools, or are they locked in to where the parents live?
Well, now that we have open enrollment, that's a game changer as well.
Are you for that?
No.
So you think government should control education and parents should not have a choice in their child's education?
No. That's
But if you're against open enrollment, that means a student is forced to go to a school within a certain geographical area, and you just stated that you thought that that's the way it should be, and you're against charter schools, which are public schools, and you're against that even though they're getting less than 2% of the budget.
I'm not necessarily
and public
against
education
charter
is getting
schools.
97%
What
of
I'm
the budget.
against is the continual expansion of charter schools in the state, which continues to erode funding for traditional public schools.
But there are parents that choose to send their children to these charter schools, and that's what you're against, is parents exercising a choice?
I guess so.
Thank you for going on record and saying that.
Further questions for Dr. Koopman? Seeing none, thank you. Mike Brown.
Thank you, Chairman Cook, Representative Baiting, for allowing me to testify today. Once again, my name is Mike Brown. I'm Legislative Affairs Director for the Department of Education. We appreciate the bill being held for a week as we kind of talk about a couple concerns that we have. Dr. McCormick ran through me this morning and yesterday. So, first of all, we appreciate the language that decreased the amount of days available for unavailable buildings to be posted, reducing it from the 2 years to the 90 days. So we appreciate that. In addition, we would ask for consideration and respect to the proposed language that allows for a district that is already in distress to be exempt from the requirements of Section 3. In addition, we would ask that the allowance of those districts who are not deemed to be distressed yet have entered into a corrective action plan and or those who appear on a watch list as defined by the fiscal indicators under last year's Bill 1315, if you all remember that. A concern is the provision currently states that a school must sell their buildings to a non-public school. The department thinks that this should be a may provision. In addition to that, and tying on to that, as currently written, if non-pubs buy and sell property for a gain, they should be required to send that profit back to the traditional public school. That is not required under the bill. And it's my understanding that charter schools would be required to provide that gain if they sell it back to the traditional public school. So non-pubs are exempt from that under this bill. Another concern is in reference to the school corporations who pass an operating referendum to share a portion of the money realized from the referendum with charter schools in the school corporations area. This will decrease the amount of money realized from the referendum by the school corporation. The school corporation will take all the risk and incur the costs of the referendum, but would have to share some of the proceeds with the charter schools. Depending on how many charter schools are in the school corporation's area, the decrease in the amount of money realized by the school corporation could be considerable. This would seemingly have a chilling effect to school corporations' willingness to pursue a referenda, which is the only way to increase funding oftentimes. In consideration of the voters, they now would not have the ability to determine where their tax monies go. So, like I said, we appreciate the opportunity of holding the bill and the willingness to listen to us, be happy to answer any questions, but and also happy to work with Representative Baining and anyone else who to address some of our concerns. Thank you.
Representative Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These schools that are sold, they have to be used as schools, correctly?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, so I'm sitting on I pulled up on Compass the iStep Plus for 10th graders. Okay, in 2017, in both English, language arts, and math, 66.3% of public school students did not pass. Okay, that's 2/3. Those are our standards in a system that we've controlled. We've had that student for 10 years. Do those horrid performance numbers just not beg to be trying something different?
Well, that's I appreciate the question. I know that we have our standards are very rigorous. Where we're setting our children up as we should for success.
2/3 of our kids can't pass our own standards in a system that we've had them for 10 years. And we should, you're expecting me to sit here and continue with status quo when we are failing that many students in a government-run system, and you're putting up opposition to try something different?
Well, Representative Lucas, we are certainly in favor to try new things, and Dr.
Is that what we're
McCormick.
trying to do?
I think this is certainly anything that passes out of this committee, I would hope, would be to advance children and their learning to eventually have them increase their test scores or to have better schools. Absolutely. I think there are different ways to do it, and perhaps this bill is not it. But we are working to, for example, as part of our strategic plan to increase literacy. We're looking to increase STEM opportunities for children and for teachers. So we're trying to find ways to increase our test scores. Absolutely, that's always a goal.
Okay, looking at just math only, 66.3% of our students did not pass our own test, our own standards, after having students in our system for 10 years. That's just math only. Okay, in the private sector, we would be fired because those results are abominable. And given the fact that there's almost roughly 80,000 students per class, we are failing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of students every year and failing to prepare them for the real world. Now we're talking STEM, which is generally your higher areas of education. We're completely failing those students. So I am all for anything that goes outside this failing little box that we call government-run education.
Further questions, Representative Goodrich?
What, you stated that, this referendum sharing would be unfair, and again, I think I heard you say that, that the school system would incur the cost of the referendum. Can you help me, explain, or can you explain what the cost is to the taxpayers for a public school referendum and what exactly you're talking about when it comes to, the school would have the cost, or concur the cost of having a referendum? Can you help me with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's my understanding that anytime you run some sort of referendum, there's always going to be a cost, right, from the elections office. But dealing specifically with schools, there's certainly some sort of cost that is incurred through the beginning stages of a referendum, from the school board and whatnot, from engaging the community to letting them know, hey, we're coming out with a referendum, please support it. Whatever sort of marketing strategies that a school corporation may want to engage in to incentivize and to encourage the community to come out and vote it up. I'm sure there are other costs that are incurred that are just not coming to mind right now. If there are that I'm missing that are big, I will get with you.
So my understanding is that a referendum has to be funded by private. Are you saying that we're actually using taxpayers' money to go out and propose and persuade voters to vote for a referendum?
So I guess, unless I was misunderstood, it wasn't my understanding that a referendum had to be paid for from a private entity. I thought that there could be some expenses that are incurred from the taxpayer in order to begin and to carry out a referendum process.
Thank you.
So-
I wouldn't quote the law, but I just want to know, but we are, from your understanding, we're using taxpayer money that could go to education, our students and our teachers, to promote referendums to fund the school. Is that correct?
Well, no. I guess what I'm saying. I guess one of the biggest issues that we have with this language, charter schools being allowed to automatically be captured in a school referendum, is we are possibly jeopardizing the referendum process of being voted down by those individuals who live in the district and vote on this because they are some big supporters of their public schools and they want to see their public schools get funded. And so that we're just bringing it to the committee's attention. There's that risk that carries of it being voted down.
No, I appreciate that. But like you said, when 25% of IPS students are going to maybe a charter school, maybe the taxpayer, the parent choice wants that tax dollars to actually go to the public charter school.
Sure.
Because really, at the end of the day, there's a lot of folks that vote no on a referendum, and their tax dollars still go to the public school. Correct?
Sure. Absolutely.
Thank you. Representative Smith?
Yeah, before I ask my question, I think it should be noted that the charter schools, those percentages you're talking about, the charter schools as well as the choice schools for vouchers in my community are not doing any better. They're doing worse than the traditional schools. So the information that you shared about the mastery rate is more applicable to them than they are to our traditional schools. So I need to note that. My question to you is, you said that you support the 90 days. I need to understand, I'm still kind of vague on that. If I claim that I want to use this property, and I do that within the timeline of 90 days, I now have a 2-year window to do something. And then if I don't do anything, it goes back on that list, and somebody else can claim it. So we're keeping it out there more for deterioration and vandalism and other kinds of things that happens to vacant buildings in urban settings. Okay, and that's what the charter schools are, in urban settings. And so if you support that, I have no problem with closing the window for the 90, for 90 days, but to put it back on the list where the school corporation can't do anything with it as far as disposing of it, that is what concerns me. So how's your view on that? Because that could keep it out there for 6, 7, 8, 10 years out there.
Sure, and thank you for the question. So just to, I guess, restate what I first said, when a unused building gets put on our list under current law, that needs to remain on the list for 2 years.
Right.
This bill brings it down to 90 days.
I understand.
That's the particular portion that I spoke about that we are in favor of.
Okay.
Now,
what about the other end, the other information that's a part of this bill that puts it back on that list?
So just to restate, charter school purchases the property or leases the property. After a year, they decide to leave that building that sits unused for another couple of years. And so you're.
Well, maybe they never do anything with it at all, but they have 2 years to do something with it.
I'm just trying to think of a reason, and maybe someone can explain this. A reason why a charter would want to buy a piece of property or lease it and just let it go to waste.
They may not get the charter. They may not even get the charter. They're applying for one, and according to what the author said, that entity could apply or put claim on the property and not even have a charter.
I think you pose an interesting question. If that's something that you and Representative Manning want to come up with as an amendment to address it,
there's some gaps in there.
be happy to look at it.
Now, what is your opinion on? And I support your positions. Every position you had, except that one, I had a question about that. I support your positions. What is your viewpoint of charters with board members making decisions about local tax dollars, and they don't live within their geographical boundary? Right now, if we float a referendum, those persons who are on that board, because they're elected, must live in that geographical region. But with these charter schools, we have people who are from, and this is just from Gary for our 10. We have people who live in Elsip, Illinois. We have people who live in Valparaiso. It's in Indiana, but it's not in Gary. Munster in Indiana, but not in Gary. Hammond in Indiana, but not in Gary. Just a variety of places. Portage, but not in Gary. Okay, and they're going to make decisions about local tax dollars paid by Gary residents. It's unfair. What's your opinion on it?
Yeah, I certainly understand and see your concern. Once again, I think you do make a good point. In order for me to formulate the best answer for you, what I'd like to do is to get an answer directly from Dr. McCormick. It's like I said, I don't want you to think I'm avoiding the question. I just don't want to speak out of line on the
I didn't
department's
really want you to
stance
answer it. I just wanted to get that information out there. Thank
on this. Okay, gotcha.
Thank you. One more question.
I just add one more. Can you clarify? I think you used the term profit on. Maybe I misunderstood, but can you clarify that one type of school has to give the profit back and then one doesn't? And then how do you actually clarify profit on tax dollars?
Well, okay, so if you look on page 19, line 12, It says that if a school building is sold to a charter under this section, the charter school or any entity related to the charter school subsequently sells or transfers the building to a third party. The charter or the entity must transfer an amount equal to the gain, so it's not profit, it's using this law, it's a gain, in the property minus the adjusted basis to the school corporation that initially sold the vacant building. Our point is this provision does not apply to non-publics, it only applies to charters.
Yeah, I apologize. I thought you said the term profit. I'm sorry.
I believe I used profit, but technically gain. I apologize.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Chris Lagoni. Chris still here? Yep, there he is. Then be followed by David Marcotti.
Thank you, Chairman Banning, Representative Cook, and members of the Education Committee. Our input is based on the concept that we have two policy directives coming together and sort of in conflict. We have school choice, which is the law of the land in Indiana, versus, for our membership, a request for efficiencies. The Indiana General Assembly has continually asked our members for small and rural schools to become more efficient, consolidate, find ways, become more efficient entities. We support and have been asking for a provision in 1641 that provides an expedited process for selling or closing a building. We think it's good policy to allow districts to right-size their buildings based on their student population. This current law that requires a sale or transfer to another entity or lease for $1, we feel like is blocking some schools from closing facilities because they fear this. In Sullivan County, there was a school that went through 2 or 3 years of pain of closing a school. It was a very tough decision to close Union High School. 15 or so patrons got together and they started a new school corporation almost. And it's thriving. Duggar Union, it is a charter school, and it's within the confines of the Northeast School Corporation. So people have seen this and they were like, wow, you went through the pain of getting smaller and more efficient. Their enrollment went from 1,200 to 800, and Duggar Union's doing okay. It's up to 400, but it's sort of conflicting that model of we want choice, and again, it's seen through the lens for our urban settings, but we also want you to be efficient. So there's no easy answers, but we do support the concept of shortening this 2-year window. If there could be an expedited process, if I'm a small school and I have declining enrollment, it's in the best mode for our taxpayers to close this facility. Let's work to do that. We have a couple recommendations. We have concerns of automatically selling or leasing the facility to another entity. It makes no sense for our members to sell something. There's some confusion on land. You could sell a building, but if you close a high school in a rural area, that land has value. It's a 60 to 80 acre campus. Farmland's $15,000 an acre. That's $1 million in value sitting there for a company that could go back on the tax rolls. So we'd like some clarification if this bill moves forward, could you do something with the building, but that land could still become taxable land that goes back on the tax rolls, is profitable for the local entity. The state board has developed some criteria for district reorganization. We think it has application in this. If you're in a small and rural area and someone wants to break off, the state board said, number one, in district reorganization, it should be financially affordable to the change that's occurring, and the educational opportunity should be equal to what they received. We think this is a good standard and may have applicability. We have some more input on that, but those are the provisions we support and would like to discuss some more.
Thank you, Chris. Questions for Chris? Representative Delaney.
Yes, thank you. I'm really trying to put myself in the place of a small or rural school district, which I assume you represent. So if they choose to close a school because maybe they don't need it or it's not efficient, they run the risk that somebody then picks it up and becomes a charter school.
As public officials, you know every decision you make, 50% of the people like it, 50% don't. It's a 2-year process of closing a facility. It's contentious. No matter what, someone's going to be upset. And I get it. If you're closing especially the high school, that small town is losing its identity. It's losing economic opportunity. It's tough. And so, yes, under current code, that another group of people could come and say, I want that. We also recommend that maybe there's a provision that if someone wants to start a charter, they send a letter directly to the DOE. For our entity, for our members, it's probably going to be somebody in the community who wants to start the charter. We recommend you just carbon copy the school district so it doesn't have to sit at the DOE for 30 days waiting for it to know. It's probably not going to be an outside entity that comes in and see any profit margins or anything there for that community that makes it viable. It's going to be people in that community who are vested that may want to start a charter. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, and I think that would be a positive component of this. If you also put in the provision that's in this bill, that if you have a referendum, it has to be shared with the charter, how is that going to impact the small school district board when they're sitting there looking at this idea?
Well, that's my original statement. I said this is conflicting with the concept of choice versus efficiencies. And so if you're telling them to be smaller, be right size, be more efficient, you would probably be closing something so you don't have to have a referendum. But if then later you went and had a referendum for a construction process, I guess you would have to include them, but it sort of conflicts those two policy ideas. Be efficient, but also support the inefficiency of the double entity. And it's a tough question.
So you
We would not be in favor of that language.
track it through, so the small school district ends up, in effect, creating a charter school in its district. If it then wants a referendum, it has to include this competing charter district. And in addition, if our idea is to consolidate and have fewer school districts, we've gone in exactly the opposite direction.
Yeah, that's our point. What we've been asking for is this is hurting the ability of some groups to take on consolidation because they go through the pain of it and then they're just going to be back to where they were because there's an opportunity to start something for people who want another school in that setting.
Yeah, so this is really very important because we're in the middle of this big fight in this committee about how to pay teachers more and how to make sure the money goes to the classroom. But the way this system could work in the small communities that have declining enrollments is that when you try to deal with your declining enrollment by closing a school, you end up with that school, in fact, not closed. You end up with public property that was controlled by the school board now being controlled by a separate profit or not-for-profit entity. If you choose to have a referendum to solve your problems and get teacher pay up, you have to share that money with your competition.
I thought it was just the building part, but I might be wrong.
Well, I read it as the building part. I don't know how that's restricted. This gets very complicated.
Yeah, you're right.
But thank you. You've helped me a great deal.
Representative Smith.
Yes, I haven't highlighted this point in this bill, but I want your opinion on it. It says that if a school corporation doesn't comply with the requirement to make a vacant or unused school building available to a charter school and they sold it, for example, they didn't close it, they sold it before they closed it, okay, then what would happen is that they would have to put that money that they were trying to generate for the operation of their school district, they would have to put it in the school facility assistance program for charter schools. What's your viewpoint on that?
Well, I think that's putting some teeth and accountability into following the law that's created.
Where the money goes, though, once again, the money is going to charter schools when the traditional public schools need the money too. Once again,
So the penalty would go to support charter schools all
Right,
through the state. So
but the point is that I'm trying to make is that going with the premise that was offered, and I was here and opposed to the charter school movement. The problem is that they argue for competition. You're supporting the competition, and whether we know it or not, we have created competition. We didn't have competition before, and we have it. I don't believe in supporting the competition. I'm not a win-win kind of person. I got to win. I mean, I win at all costs. I want win-win for most people, but here I become the loser.
well, school choice is mixed. Some of our members very much benefit from it if they're near a large metropolitan area. You know, I'm gonna be honest. Many of our schools are benefiting from school choice. If they're not near a metropolitan area, they're taking 5 from their neighbor, and the neighbor's sending them 5, and it's kind of a wash. So, school choice is the law of the land. As far as commenting on the accountability, I mean, there's accountability in the law. It's just putting some teeth into, hey, follow the law, or there's this accountability measure. I can't really
Representative
speak to that.
Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those small schools in the rural areas that are shut down, using Representative Delaney's scenario, and another entity comes in and opens them up, and parents choose to send their children there. Okay, there are no students being denied an education in any of these scenarios, correct?
One of the concerns that's expressed to me from members of the Indiana General Assembly is that small and rural schools don't have the course offerings. Indiana Chamber put out a report about a year ago and highlighted and said the problem with your small schools is their course offerings are not robust enough to offer the needs of the 21st century. We don't totally agree with that, but if you're saying these small schools don't have the staffing and the ability to offer the needs, if you're further subdividing it, it's sort of going against the argument that we need to become more efficient. We need a little bit more robust offering. It's just kicking the can. We'll use Northeast School Corporation in Sullivan County, where this has already occurred. They were at 1,200. They decided to close the building. They closed the building. Grace College came in, made it a charter. It's Duggar Union. Great people. I know the principal there. They're good people. They care for kids. They're trying to do good things. They're about 400. Northeast School Corporation's down to about 800, and it's in the paper. They've had year-long discussions about what do they do next. They closed the building. They went from 1,200 to 800 in 5 years, accelerated by the charter school. Now we have 2 entities. We have a school corporation with 800, and we have a charter school corporation, in essence, that's 400. Both are offering an education, but if we're operating from the parameters that are given to me by the Indiana General Assembly, we want you to be larger. We want you to offer more robust curriculum. I would say the opportunity to offer the robust curriculum the Indiana General Assembly wants us to have is not occurring if you're subdividing into smaller entities. If we're okay with that entity, that's fine. Then don't refer to our organization and tell us you need to get bigger and you're an inefficient model and we shouldn't fund you, because we're saying it's okay. We want choice. We want to fund caring charter schools that are providing an education. Well, we're that too. We're small. Does that make sense? I don't know if I answered
Sure,
your question.
but those 400 students that the government-run school lost, those 400 students are getting a good education according to what you just said, correct?
Yeah, they're in a place where people care about them and it's connected to their community.
Okay, so what if we were to extend charter school rules to government-run schools?
There currently exists, I believe, a school.
So you guys can compete with charters?
I don't understand the question. A public school could turn itself into a charter school. I think that's allowed by Indiana code.
Okay, I'm missing the
That's
problem
correct.
here then, unless we're more concerned about control than we are actually educating the student. Because again, no student is being denied an education in either charter or government-run education. Okay, but it's the parents choosing where they want to, the type of education they want their child to have.
Representative Baining, did you want to weigh in on that?
School choice is the law of the land. I agree, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris, 2 points. First off, there's been some things in this committee that are not accurate. Charter schools have to be nonprofit. They cannot be for-profit. They can be operated. They can have an education management organization that could provide profit. But we also have, in our traditional public schools, we have entities that are for-profit. So I think it irritates me a little bit when people throw out for-profit, not-for-profit. The flip side is you made the statement, and to kind of carry on with Representative Lucas' statement, that the General Assembly has policies pushing you to consolidate or whatever.
Become more efficient.
Be more efficient is a lot different than, you mentioned rigor and things like that. And you and I have talked about that, but I don't think there's anything out there on the books today that we're saying you have to, consolidate, merge together.
You're correct.
And I think the Indiana Chamber brought up the data just to kind of reflect this is, the way Indiana is today. And if we want to have more opportunities for those kids, we need to be thinking about ways to maybe be more efficient or provide more synergies together that would provide some of that. But in the school that you talked about, the rural charter school, it's not the one in Shelby County. It's is it the
No, this one's in Sullivan County.
Is it a K-12 system or a K-8? Okay, I know that there's a charter school. I think the one rural charter school that I'm aware of is in Shelby County. I believe it's elementary. It is not K-12. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think there's one down by the Ohio River, down in southern Indiana. There's one down there that's K-8. Again, they're good people that care about kids. I just want to point out there's just two conflicting policies heading here: school choice versus efficiency and robust curriculum. And we often get stuck on what it looks like for Marion County and Lake
County. That's
County.
where I'm challenging you. I don't think that policies, because there is no policy requiring you to merge, to come together. I mean, we've had discussions.
I accept that.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Goodrich.
Yeah, just maybe a couple quick questions. So the 400 student charter school that you have, that you keep addressing, I assume the way you're talking that offers a robust curriculum and that's efficient. And my question is what holds? I mean, because you said you were losing students, but the parents choose to send the kids to the 400-person charter school. So when you look at that, what is it that they can offer that the 800-person school can't? And then second to that is if they would pass a referendum in that area itself, if you've got a third of the students in that school, why wouldn't that referendum go to that school?
Your first question is, would a school corporation of 400 offer a robust curriculum? I would say they do.
I'm sorry. What I asked is the charter school that you addressed, I wanted to know if you thought that was efficient, because I'm really myself conflicted about how efficiency and choice are conflicting, because I run a business. I have to do that every day, and I understand school's not a business. But
yeah, I would
my
say
point
that
is I continue to hear this efficiency is a conflict with choice, which it confuses me. But I just wondered, is the 400-person school?
Yeah, I know of many 400 student school corporations that are efficient. There's some in Randolph County. Donnie Bozeman has down here and testify. He's done a great job and has an efficient organization. Yes, I think it's possible to have an efficient school corporation or a charter school of about 400. I think those are very similar organizations that offers a robust curriculum.
Thank you, Chris. I think one of the things he's trying to address that he mentioned earlier was the sentimentality that 400 that splintered off were upset they closed the building. So I just want to say I've been through that myself twice, and so you get as far as communities split over the building being closed, and so they had the means at least to go and start their own charter school. I would have countered if I'd have been superintendent. I would have tried to do my own charter school within Northeast, and then had all of that coming under one roof. But that's just neither here nor there. But that is how it works. Thank you, Chris. You brought a good perspective, a whole different
Thank you for the
avenue with
opportunity
small
to testify.
schools.
If I could help in any way, let me know.
David Marcotti, followed by Ali Miranda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Dr. David Marcotte, Executive Director of the Indiana Urban Schools Association. There are two components of House Bill 1641 which could place a significant financial burden on public school districts. As proposed in this bill, changing the duration for which a school corporation may list a vacant school building as unavailable from 2 years to 90 days doesn't allow time for enrollment variations to impact the decision on whether to reconfigure a vacant school building or to vacate an existing building in the first place. Both scenarios could have a substantial negative financial impact. It may be fiscally responsible to vacate a school building. However, student enrollment variances may cause the decision to be temporary. The existing 2-year timeline provides appropriate time to ensure enrollment patterns are stable. Relinquishing a building followed a short time later by the possibility of needing additional educational space would confuse the local community and may cause school boards and administrators not to vacate a school building, even though it may be the sound thing to do at the time. Secondly, requiring a school operating referendum to include a provision that each charter school in the allocation area receive a part of the proceeds collected is not practical. School boards take the responsibility of conducting operating referendums very seriously and ask the community for this additional funding source only when the financial need is necessary to maintain student programming, sustain desired staffing, install school safety enhancements, maintain the physical plant, and other similar functions. Requiring a charter school to receive a portion of the referendum proceeds would inflate the request and hand local tax dollars to an entity with no oversight by the elected school board. According to the information provided by the Legislative Services Agency, several school corporations would see a significant percentage of the referendum levy distributed to local charter schools, including Gary Community School Corporation, 53.5%, Indianapolis Public Schools, 25%, Muncie Community Schools, 18.5%, School City of East Chicago, 11.7%, Anderson Community Schools, 11.7%. These distributions would have a detrimental impact on the original purpose for asking their communities to support the traditional public school system with additional tax-supported funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Thank you,
Representative
Councilman.
Goodrich.
Can you tell me, what is the duration you talked about, enrollment period? Because, you talked about the 90 days versus two years. What, in your opinion, what is the correct timeline when you would know about enrollment?
The existing statute of 2 years is fine.
Seeing no further questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Ally Miranda, followed by Joe Grammelspacher.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Allie Miranda with Bingham Greenbaum Dahl. I'm here representing Crystal House Schools. We rise in support of House Bill 1641 and specifically the provision that would provide for the sharing of referenda funds with charter schools within the allocation area. I won't say too much beyond the fact that charters, which are public schools and serve public school students, successfully do function within the existing funding gap because of our lack of access to property tax dollars. However, referenda that takes that gap over and above the existing property tax caps serves only to broaden that funding gap between charter schools and traditional public schools. We feel that it serves the needs of all students, including those who choose to attend charter schools, to provide for some form of equity in those funding solutions for charter schools within the allocation area of a public school referendum. So we're thankful to begin this conversation and look forward to working with Representative Baining and the members of the committee, as well as the other stakeholders involved, to come to a positive solution for how we can move forward with this concept.
Thank you, Ally. Questions for Ally? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank
Next, Joe Grammelspacher. Am I saying that correct, I hope?
Yeah, thank you, sir. It's Grommelspacher.
Gotcha.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Joe Grommelspacher, and I'm honored to be here today as a proud representative of Indianapolis Public Schools. I serve as Special Projects Director in the Office of the Superintendent, and one of my primary responsibilities is to develop and manage the district's real estate strategies. As you may know, for the last 4.5 years, IPS has been at the forefront of innovation in public education in Indiana. The district came to the General Assembly in 2013 to support groundbreaking flexibility, which provided a path to identify and implement locally led interventions in chronically underperforming schools. Since that time, IPS has partnered with promising charter school operators to restart 6 IPS schools which had persistently unacceptable results for students. The early data on the academic impact of those interventions is encouraging. Over the same time period, IPS has pursued an aggressive real estate strategy to right-size the district's operational and school building footprint. IPS has sold 12 buildings and leased an additional 5 former schools to charter and private school operators. Sales of former operational buildings have yielded over $19 million, all of which has been reinvested in the district's general fund. This strategy reduced IPS real estate holdings by over 1 million square feet, is projected to generate over $400 million in assessed valuation growth, and perhaps most importantly to us, it provided a critical cash infusion to invest in teacher compensation. For the first time in over a decade, IPS has raised teacher salaries in collective successive bargaining agreements, and with a vote of confidence from our taxpayers in November, we're poised to do more for our educators. While a significant number of property transactions have been related to operational buildings, IPS made the painful decision in 2017 to right-size the footprint of our high school facilities. Since closing John Marshall and Broad Ripple High Schools, IPS has been seeking to discern the highest and best use of these properties. What has become abundantly clear is that each of these former high school sites demands a comprehensive approach to redevelopment. Each building is over 340,000 square feet and designed to serve up to 2,800 students, capacity far in excess of what any single charter school would be able to occupy in an efficient and cost-effective manner. We're here today to ask that the committee consider amending this bill to make that comprehensive redevelopment approach possible. We believe there are opportunities for a path forward at each of our 2 high school sites, which retains a valuable educational use while also contributing to the economic development and overall vitality of the communities they have long served. We're committed to a transparent public process which is aligned with community wishes. Unfortunately, the redevelopment these sites demand and that these communities deserve is not permitted under existing law if a charter school wants to buy the building, nor would it be possible under this bill. In its current form, this bill also fails to address the debt financing challenges related to sale or lease to a charter school for $1. IPS is poised to work with members of this committee on language which will permit these former high school properties to find their next life as valuable assets in their respective communities. We're also committed to a legislative solution that won't interfere with the goal of ensuring that taxpayer-funded school buildings of the right size and suitable for ongoing use as schools can be made available to charter operators in a taxpayer-friendly manner.
Thank you, Joe. Questions? Seeing, there's one. Representative Delaney.
Mr. Groundspecker, if I understand you correctly, your concern is that a charter school, for example, that might be able to educate 400 or 500 kids could send in a letter and acquire a building set up for 2,500 kids. And in the process, leave you with the bonds to pay, I assume.
Under current law, yes, and under this proposal as well, we would still be paying the debt.
Yeah, you're on the debt. This bill does not relieve you from the debt. What is the total debt of IPS itself and its related building corporation?
I don't know our total outstanding debt. I believe it's somewhere on the order of $400 million total at this time. I can get you the actual fact, but something like that across all of our buildings.
So there's a real impact on you in taking a building that could be used for 2,500 students in another era, but no longer, on which you have debt, giving it to someone else for $1 or $1 a year, and you still pay the debt.
Yes, sir, and what we've done is studied what it would take to defease the bonds on Broad Ripple High School in particular. There's no debt attached to the John Marshall facility at this time. We also are thinking a lot about T.C. Howe, Emmerich Manual, and Emma Donans currently operate under turnaround agreements governed by the State Board of Education, because some of those buildings have debt concerns as well, and we're thinking about the future of those. But at Broad Ripple, we estimate that to defease the debt attached to that building would take $5 million in cash payment. So if IPS were to sell that property for $1, IPS would have to take $5 million from either our general fund or one of our local property tax funds, transfer it to the building corporation in order to be able to consummate a sale.
Now, you use this very elegant word, defease. You mean that would pay off the debt on there or reduce it to the point where you'd be out of under your loan covenants?
That is what we believe would take to reduce it, the total debt outstanding across all buildings, to allow the release of Broad Ripple High School from the building corporation back to IPS in order to sell. There's also an issue that is more complex than perhaps we'll discuss today. around the fact that our debt is tax exempt and there would be a private use, private payment problem, even if we were to enter a lease with a charter school for $1. So if we were not to sell, we were to continue to pay down the debt on its regular schedule. Just entering a lease with a charter operator for $1 could pose problems with our debt financing.
What is the status of the charter operator that would make this happen? How are they different than your status?
So from our understanding of IRS code, charter school operator is considered a private entity for federal tax purposes. Even if it is an entity receiving public funding or predominantly or entirely public funding, it is still considered for IRS purposes a private entity.
Put your bonds in a position of not being tax exempt?
It would certainly risk that, and we continue to study that issue with attorneys who are much more knowledgeable about this than I am, and happy to continue that conversation. But we do believe there are very significant risks to our debt financing.
I'd be happy to talk to you about how I can help you out.
Representative Baining has a follow-up question concerning the
Joe,
conversation.
regarding that issue, though, you and I have had some discussions in regards to that with you. There are ways that you could technically probably move that liability to another facility that may be unencumbered or may not have that.
Yeah, happy to share our current understanding of that process, and it is something in the buildings I mentioned that we have sold. We did sell one former school which had debt associated with it. What would have to happen in that case is that IPS would have to approach the trustee that is the manager of our building corporation and request that the trustee permit the transfer of so-called suitable replacement property, so moving the debt to another building. We could do that, but that would constrain our debt issuing capacity in the future, because whenever we issue debt, we have to sell buildings to the building corp to get the cash proceeds. And so we have $52 million approved by taxpayers of capital referendum debt that we can issue. That's going to take selling buildings to the building corporation. So if, for example, we transferred 2 to 3 smaller elementary schools or another high school facility that has less debt in exchange for Broad Ripple, that would be subject to the trustee's approval, which we have no control over whatsoever, and the trustee represents bondholders, and they may or may not be amenable to that. But if we were to do that, our pool of IPS-owned buildings that we could sell to the building corp to issue debt in the future would be significantly constrained. So we could find ourselves in a position where we couldn't have any new money financing, even if we got authority from taxpayers to issue referendum debt. We would have no buildings to sell to the building corp.
Thank you, Joe. Seeing no more questions. John L. Sisser.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, John L. Sesser, Indiana Non-Public Education Association. I really didn't initially intend to testify on this bill because I thought it was focusing totally on charters, but I did read more closely, and there is a section that deals with building access that I would like to speak in support of. We in the non-public sector as well occasionally have schools that are looking for a facility, and many times communities are wanting a vacant school building to be used for educational purposes. Also, many times school corporations are interested in selling that building to a non-public school, but as I understand the law, sometimes state law gets in the way of that, or at least makes it very, very cumbersome. So if this language in the bill will make that happen more easily for schools to access those buildings so that they can continue to be used for educational purposes. We do understand that in the pecking order, we're definitely number 3, with publics using it first, charters second, and potentially non-pubs if the sale is available. But we would appreciate your support of that aspect of the bill.
Thank you, John. Questions? Seeing none. Thank you. Kim Dobson, followed by Luke McNamee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Kim Dodson with the ARC of Indiana. I'd like you to go back to Chairman Baining's opening statement where he referenced one section of the bill that does not relate to charter schools, that is hopefully non-controversial. This is the section of the bill on page 22, section 14. It relates to the State Advisory Council for the Education of Special Education Students. The bill specifically asks for the ARC of Indiana to have a designated spot on the council. The council provides guidance, policy guidance to the Department of Education on special education and other related issues. Currently, we are designated on the council at the will of the superintendent if we fit into one of the other categories. And again, we would just like to have that specific spot on the council so that we are always assured to have a voice at the table.
Thank you, Kim. Questions for Kim? Seeing none, thank you very much. Luke?
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, I'm Luke McNamee, Policy Director for the Institute for Quality Education. So we just wanted to share our support for the concepts in House Bill 1641, particularly those that attempt to address equitable funding and access for charter schools. Also, the unused building statutes have been tweaked repeatedly over the years, but they still not quite achieve the intended purpose. So we appreciate the opportunity to streamline those and make them more practicable for all the parties involved. That said, we hear that there might be some changes needed, so we are looking forward to working with the author on those changes. Lastly, we currently charter schools don't receive local property tax dollars and are funded primarily by the state tuition support. So we support the concept of allowing them to share in those referendums. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to address those.
Questions for Luke? Seeing none, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Representative Bain, any closing remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. I intend to have we'll have an amendment. Nothing has been released yet in regards to trying to deal with some of the issues that have been discussed today. I would, however, the one issue Representative Smith has brought up in regards to Gary on page 21, lines 11 through 14, an emergency manager of a distressed school corporation that may sell an existing building without complying with the requirements of Section 3 of this chapter. So we have already provided flexibility for that school district because that school district owes the state of Indiana a significant amount of money, and we're trying to provide flexibility with the DUAB board in terms of making sure that the state can receive the assets of any sale. We will definitely be looking at language. Like I said, I challenged IPS and some other people to come to the table and be willing to talk about ways we can make this a better bill and try to make, especially the unused building portion of this, more functional so that it does provide facilities for charter schools that are right-sized facilities at minimal to no expense, and then also helps provide opportunities for traditional public schools to dispose of those assets when they have the ability to do so. So we'll have that next week. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. That concludes today's hearing, and we'll bring back with the amendment. We are adjourned.